Hey guys, Scott from recordingsolution.com. First off, thank you for picking up a copy of How to Record Drums. I think you're going to learn a lot from this if you've never recorded drums, so let's dive in. I want to start out the video by talking about the things you need to think of before you even worry about the mic position and what kinds of mics. When you record anything, it starts with the instrument. So if you have a crappy drum set, old, it just doesn't sound good, you don't have new heads on there, they're not tuned, there's nothing that you can do with mic positioning and recording techniques that is going to make that drum kit sound good. So make sure you have a decent drum kit, you change the heads, you have the heads tuned. If you don't know how to tune it, find somebody who does, or watch a YouTube video. The world is at your fingertips now. Figure out how to do it. And then it starts with the player. I get a lot of emails and a lot of people talking about wanting to learn the best recording and mixing techniques. But first we need to be honest with ourselves also. If I'm a crappy drummer, so I wouldn't attempt to try to record drums on one of my tracks knowing that I'm not going to be able to pull it off. I mean, I can keep a beat, but I'm not a good drummer. So I hire out drummers to play on my records because A, I'm not doing everything myself, and B, you're collaborating with people, and that's when some of the best music is made. So I have a pool of musicians I can pull from in the area that I'm in, but you can also go online and search, like airgigs.com is one good place to find some people that, for any instrument, drums, vocals, whatever, or ask around, go to shows, find a drummer you like, approach them, ask them if they do studio work, and just do some networking. But again, it starts with the instrument, the player, and then we can get into the recording and miking techniques. So I want to start out the video on the right foot. So thanks again. Let's dive in. We're going to start with the first overhead position. So let's move on. All right, guys. The first overhead mic position is what they call an XY. This doesn't really look like an XY, but I think sometimes they'll cross them and they'll look like an X and a Y. But a lot of times you'll see this. This mic is capturing this side of the kit, and this mic is capturing that side of the kit. And it's about right over where the kick pedal hits the batter head, and about 3 or 4 feet up from like the snare and the tom area right here. And the reason they're so close together is you got to worry about phase. So this is an easy way to not run into phase problems. And all phase is say when the waveform, the sound from the snare hits this mic, the time it takes to hit that mic, and the time it takes to hit this mic. If they're different in your DAW or whatever DAW you use, if those waveforms are hitting at different times in the mics, they'll cancel each other out, and you'll lose that tonal quality and the punch of the kick and the bass. The kick and the snare, and so this is a good way to avoid that. If you're just starting out and you don't want to have to worry about phase, do something like this because they're already pretty much in the exact same distance from the snare. So XY, first position, we'll record a little bit and then we'll show you what that sounds like. Okay, before we go any further, you can use one mic to record a drum, or you can use the 2 overheads, and that can be your drum sound. Back in the days, they used to record with one mic. If you think about a drum kit as an instrument and not separate drums, then you would only technically need one mic, kind of like you're miking an acoustic guitar or a vocalist. The key is to move the mic around in your room because all the rooms are different. We all have different acoustic treatment or lack of acoustic treatment. But if you can position the mic maybe further away from the drum kit, maybe 5-6 feet up in the air looking down, in front of the drum kit, looking down at the kick, and just move the mic around in the room. And if you can capture, if your room allows you to capture a good drum sound with one mic, then go for it. If that's all you have, because a lot of people don't have 8 mics to mic a drum kit. But if you want to go for 2 mics, using these overhead techniques that we just showed you and the ones we're about to show you, that can be your drum sound. Don't think that that's not a good enough drum sound. I mean, tons of songs just use overheads. You just position them in a position where you can get a good low end punch, and you get the snare and you get some of the toms, and then that's your drum sound. There's tons of different drum sounds. They don't all have to be 8, 9, 10 channels all mixed in and big, and that's a sound if that's what you're going for. But there's also a bunch of very cool vintage and even modern records that just use 1 mic or 2 mics, and they sound amazing. So don't think that if you only have 2 channels, if you only have a 2-channel interface, that you can't get away with using this XY technique right here. So just wanted to interject that into the video so you don't get discouraged if you don't have enough channels to do all the stuff we're doing at the moment in this video. So let's move on. All right, guys, the second overhead position is called Recorder Man, and this might be good for a small untreated room. Mine's very treated, if you can see in the video. But if you have a lot less acoustic treatment, what this does is, if you have a right-handed drummer, this mic would be, in the drummer's perspective, to the left, and it would be about 32-ish inches, and it's closer than the normal overhead distance. And so 32 inches directly above the snare, right here. You can go a little higher if you want. And then this one would be, if the drummer's right here, it's like kind of right over his, let me sit down. It'd be right over his shoulder. So it's kind of like looking down, and that's approximately about 32 inches away as well. And the reason they're so close is you're trying to take the room sounds out of your mics, because if it's not a very good quality room, and you're trying to get more of the actual direct signal from your drums. And also, the way they're positioned, it helps if you have a drummer that's really cymbal heavy and beating the crap out of the cymbals. It might tame that a little bit more in the mix, and because you're getting really close to your kick, snare, and tom area and not right over your cymbals. So Recorder Man, we'll record a little take of that and show you what that sounds like, and then we'll move on. Cool. Alright, guys, the next drum overhead position is called the Glenn Johns overhead method. Glenn Johns is a really famous engineer. He did bands like the Stones, Beatles, and Led Zeppelin, and he came up with this really cool mic positioning, overhead mic positioning that he just found by experimenting. So experiment, you might come up with a new famous drum overhead technique, or any miking technique. But what it is he has this mic about 3 to 4 feet above the kit, kind of right over in between the toms and the snare area, just looking right down here. And then he has this guy over here, kind of about 4 to 6 inches off the floor tom, and it's looking across the floor tom over to the snare, and then equal distance. Each mic is equal distance from the center of the snare, so work on phase as well. And that's it. It's really not that hard to mic these drums. Just make sure that the phase and the distance is correct, the same distance from the center of the snare. So let's play with that one. Let's do a little take, and then we'll show you what that sounds like. And then we'll have one more after this, and then we'll move on to close mic stuff. So yeah. Okay, the last positioning, overhead mic positioning, is space pair. This looks a little funny. Really, this is all about experimentation. You can go farther out space, you can go over here space. The main thing you want to focus on is, again, the same distance from the snare. Make these mics the same distance from the snare to work on phase. And again, I don't think I've mentioned it before, when you're actually in your DAW or on your board, if you're just recording straight to a board, make sure every time you do a new mic, overhead mic position, you pop everything. If they're in stereo, you pop them into mono, and you check to see if you still have that punch of the kick and the snare up the middle in mono, and that'll show you if there's any phase issue. So if you have them panned out left and right in stereo and it sounds really full and punchy, you're like, yeah, and then you turn it up, put it into mono, and it loses that punch, you might need to make sure you're checking the phase, because that's what I'm talking about. It'll cancel out each other. So always check in mono as well when you're doing this. But yeah, so I have these, I think it was like 47 inches away from the snare. That's not a set distance. I just kind of put them up there, and it doesn't have to look perfect and symmetrical as long as you experiment and move them around and you get the sound you want. Because sometimes it might be too much cymbals, not enough snare. You're going to have to do some different mic positions. This is actually the hardest one to eliminate phase and cymbals and all that stuff. So, but have fun, experiment. It's all about experimentation, and do these checks with the phase, and you should be good. So let's show you what that sounds like, and we'll move on.